Hello and welcome to another episode of Releasing Your Inner Dragon. Today we are going to talk about allegories, which I sometimes
Allegories.
pronounce allegories. So, forgive me if I mispronounce it. I am not English speaking. So before we get into what we're going to talk about is allegories and how they what the pitfalls of using them are, how to use them right, what happens if you don't use them right, when you half use them, where they really fit, and so on. So it's going to be a very thematic conversation, a very in-depth conversation about how you use this writing tool. But before we get into that, if you like what we do here and you want to see more of it, please like, subscribe, share, do all those great things. And I suppose you do want to know who we are. So my name is Marie Mullaney, and I run a fantasy YouTube channel where I talk about world building. And with me, as always, is my co-host, Drake.
I am Maxwell Alexander Drake. I'm an award-winning novelist. I was the lead fiction writer for a massive game from Sony. I teach writing all over the world. That's me.
And we are going to talk about allegory starting now. Okay, so first we should probably define what an allegory is. So allegories are when you have something that is slightly divorced from the real world, but that represents something in the real world. So an on-the-nose example is C.S. Lewis's entire story of Narnia is essentially an allegory for Christianity. Okay? Aslan is Christ. The four Pevensie children are humanity. The last battle is pretty much the book of Revelations. The whole thing is essentially an allegory for Christianity. So it's when you take something that's in our world and you change it a bit to divorce it and then use it in place.
Yeah, it's just anything that you use that is one thing but actually means something else. So like there's a Hemingway short story where, and I'll get this wrong because it's been years, but it's a husband and wife, and they're talking about like mashed potatoes over dinner or something like that. And that's all they're talking about is just like whatever it is. And I don't remember if it's a dinner or if it's something else, but they're talking about some mundane thing. And the whole chapter is about that, or the whole short story is about that. But what they're really talking about is infidelity. They're talking about pain and, the betrayal and all of this stuff. None of those words are ever mentioned at all. But that's what the story's about. Because it's an allegory. The dinner that they're having and the conversation that they're having is an allegory for the trouble that this couple is having in their marriage.
Or, Animal Farm, of course, is another very famous example of allegory where the animals overthrow human rule on the farm and they institute rule by the animals. The pigs started out and, it starts out all like equal. And it's, all animals are equal, 4 feet are better than 2. And then by the end, it's like all animals are equal, except some are better than others.
And so it's an allegory for communism and why communism leads to tyranny.
Yes, it goes a little deeper than that, because yes, it's communism, but it's like all of these things,
It's human nature. It's where does human nature go when you give ultimate power to a few people?
Yes,
they start off. I mean, there's a reason why there's the very, 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 very overused trope of the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Yes, exactly.
So, and that's Animal Farm starts off with everybody has these good intentions, and then it just ends up in horrible tyranny.
And I mean, Animal Farm is a particularly direct communist example because, yes, absolutely, he did use communism. I'm just saying it does go deeper. But, I mean, you can identify Trotsky and Lenin and Stalin in that story in The Pigs. Absolutely. Like, without a doubt.
He had a bone to pick.
He did have a
very specific bone that he was picking.
But yeah, so that is what.
Although not an allegory, but he wasn't any less subtle in 1984.
No. So the thing is, Orwell didn't. It wasn't that Orwell was a capitalist. That wasn't why he was picking a bone with communism, which I guess is what I was trying to say. It's like Orwell hated authoritarianism, and communism in Russia led to authoritarianism.
Yeah.
And that was his bone that he was picking with it.
Well, that
and
was his world. That's what destroyed everything, in his opinion, of all
and
the ills of humanity.
And then in 1984, he was saying, like, there is a road here in capitalism that leads to authoritarianism, and you need to be aware of it. And again, that wasn't an allegory as such.
Right. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I'm just saying less subtle, because that's really what you're doing with allegories. Allegories can sometimes be confused with subtext because it is a tool that the reader has to infer what you're getting at. It's not this right in the face, hey, I'm going to tell you a story about how communism can lead to tyranny. It's not that. We're going to use something else, and you're going to have to infer that I'm talking about, communism leading to tyranny. You're going to have to figure that out. I'm not going to flat out just say it.
I mean, a more subtle example of allegory is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which is, it's not really about this dude who can transform into a monster. I mean, yes, obviously it is about this dude, but it's not about this dude. It's about the split nature of humanity and the battle between, being a good person and being a monster.
Yep.
The same as with Frankenstein. Frankenstein is an allegory for, we create our own monsters and we turn them into monsters with how we treat them and that kind of thing.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So that's what allegory is. So now I brought up this topic because there's a specific allegory that I want to talk about that isn't an allegory because they went half of the way and then did nothing with it, which basically means that you've got half an allegory that just doesn't do the exploration part. So you don't sit on the pot. So it just kind of hangs there. And that is Star Wars and droids. So with Star Wars, we have the experience of some of the droids are characters that we get attached to. R2-D2, C-3PO. They are sentient to all intents and purposes, right? But in the world of Star Wars, droids have restraining bolts. They are mind wiped, which means that their sentience is removed. So there's a lot of and they're treated like when we meet them in the first movie, it's like, take the droid, have it mind wiped. Put the restraining bolt on it. The droid needs to work this. There's this whole idea that droids basically are just disposable labor. Yeah.
Well, I mean, even a step further than that, slaves.
Yeah. So they're slaves.
Against their will.
Yeah.
Basically what they're saying is, I mean, if you don't have a restraining bolt, if you don't wipe its mind, it will want to do something else.
Yes.
And so it won't do what you want it to do because it has free will.
Yes.
And so that's really where they were going. So when we were talking about this beforehand, I just want to say this. The reason why it's only half done is I don't think they actually even thought it through. I think this was just something that, and that's the reason why it isn't, like Marie said, it's not a true allegory because they don't actually ever capitalize on it. They're just elements to it. And so I think that they just didn't even realize that they were messing with it.
I tend to think that they started it and then found they didn't have the capacity.
Could be 100%.
And I think, man, okay, I can nitpick on Solo, a Star Wars story, a lot. Okay, but one of the major complaints that I have with that movie is what they did with the female droid. Okay, that the droid that was with Lando Calrissian. Okay, that droid was like she was freeing other droids from restraining bolts, saying this is barbaric, and she was arguing for like droids being allowed to have their destiny, right? And then they, at the end of that movie, they take her her body is destroyed. They take her consciousness and they upload her into the Millennium Falcon. So she goes from being an independent droid working for droid freedom to being a completely dependent in the ship object, which is then gambled away. I swear sometimes I don't know what people are thinking.
And again, that's why a lot of times the easier answer is the correct. Like, I agree with all of that,
yeah.
But I think it was probably due more to incompetence than, oh, look, I'm going to do this because, you know.
No. So I agree. Like, I absolutely agree with you. I do not think that that is the, you know, like, I think that it was just sheer, never ascribe to malice what could be simple incompetence. I don't think any of this was malicious.
Right.
But
so it's sort of like in Wonder Woman, the first Wonder Woman movie. Yeah. And we're not allowed to say the word on YouTube. So when she hugs a stranger for a week without his permission, and she hugs him over and over and over again, and then, you know, after a week of hugging him without his permission and without his knowledge, she then picks on him about it. She sees him later in the street and she's like, yeah, I've already hugged you. Like, I don't think they did that going, no, like, oh, we're definitely gonna, you know, do a reverse hugging and we're gonna have a woman hug a dude for a week and then laugh about it. I don't think they did that. I think I think they really did. Oh, you know, it'd be cool is if the ghost of her, you know, lover comes back and she gets to hug him again for a week. And how touching is that? Okay, fine, maybe a willing person that's willing to do.
So yeah, I don't ascribe any of this to malice, you know.
Yeah.
Like, I think in Star Wars' case, it was just a case of them not wanting. I think that perhaps they had an idea of exploring it, as, which is why there is some setup done towards it as an allegory. Like, it's not fully done, but there's some setup done towards it. In the restraining bolts, the mind wipes, the sentience of droid characters, you know, there's hints of it.
Could be. It could also be they were like, you know, well, these droids have advanced so much. How did they keep them from rising up and overthrowing all of humanity? So maybe they were just doing that. I mean, yeah, who knows? Because here's the thing. It's not like they didn't know what allegories were, because in A New Hope, the first movie, they use a very powerful allegory.
Yes.
In the Force. So a lot of people don't realize this, but the Force, and this is the reason why the Force is stupid after the first movie, because they try to define it. They try to take this thing that they used as an allegory and turn it into an actual thing.
Yeah.
But in Star Wars: A New Hope, the Force was an allegory for religion. It was an allegory for belief in something that's higher than you. You can't see it. It surrounds us and penetrates us, and you just have to believe. You have to believe that it's there. And so, you know, and at the end, it's literally that. Do you want to deal with technology, or do you want to go ahead and believe in something bigger than yourself?
I mean, Yoda pretty much says it in a very direct way when Luke's like, I don't believe it, then Yoda is like, and that is why you fail. I mean, right. You don't get much more on the nose than that one. You know? Right,
exactly.
Yeah.
So it's not like they didn't understand allegories and understand the power of allegories, because it's a completely different movie. Why do we use allegories? Think about Star Wars. If Star Wars was actually had a religious element, A New Hope, there was actually a priesthood and there was a god that they worshipped, and the god at the end, Luke Skywalker had to choose between using the targeting computer or praying to the god of this universe. That would be a different feel, a different movie. It would impact people differently. Religion brings a lot of baggage with it. So would it have been as popular? Probably not. Like, it's a much heavier thing. Whereas you just go, oh, I got this magic force that allows me to block lasers blindfolded. And then it's like, oh, that's so cool. But it's still believing in
And
something that doesn't
that's
exist.
yeah, that's the core power of allegory. It is the ability to address a social issue without the additional baggage.
Just like what I said with the Hemingway short story.
Yeah.
We have an entire short story about a wife confronting her husband for infidelity, and yet we never say that word. Yeah. We never talk about it.
Or with Animal Farm.
Or with Animal Farm.
You are addressing authoritarianism. You divorce it from the capitalism, communism discussion, and you talk about authoritarianism and how power leads to this authoritarian regime. Or even Narnia, with its very on-the-nose perspective, is still, it's talking animals. So it divorces it from all the weight of the Christian church to the core distillation of, I guess in the first book, the law must be answered, but it doesn't have to be answered with the death of the person. Somebody else can stand in their way. That's the core, so it's that core kind of message.
And this goes to the reason why, and you a little less than me, but why I hate every single story that's coming out today. Because they're literally just preaching. They're not using any allegories. They're just like, here's my agenda. Like they're literally going, I'm going to write Narnia, and you're going to meet Jesus Christ, and he's going to have a cross, and there's going to be, Pontius Pilate and Romans, and like, this is Narnia, and they're just going to be, there. Like there's nothing for me to enjoy. It's all just your message, your agenda. And so that's why stories today are failing, in my opinion.
I'm going to say it again. You need to watch with more discernment.
It's not just me. Disney's going to
lost
$2 billion this year. I didn't withhold $2 billion of my money from Disney. Like they lost $2 billion on IPs that are money makers without even thinking. They released Star Wars this year. They released Marvel this year. They released Indiana Jones this year, and they released Pixar.
You're not listening to me. I'm not saying I'm not saying those things don't exist. I'm saying you need to watch with more discernment. I, for example, have recently watched a great anime. Well, not an anime, sorry, an animated TV series.
Oh, you mean I should watch better stuff?
Yes.
That's what you're saying. Okay.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
Okay. Yes. 100% agree with that. I probably should stop wallowing in.
I watched an amazing animated series called Blueeyed Samurai, which was stunning. Highly recommend to anybody who enjoys anime style TV series. It was so good. And it's on Netflix. There's 8 episodes available of it. It's 1 season. There'll hopefully be a season 2. And it's really, really good. Violent. So if you have a problem with violence, don't watch it.
I could never watch it then.
but it is very, very good. And so I agree with you. Yes, there are a lot of things that come out that prioritize their message, that like 100%, that's true. But I don't watch that stuff. So it doesn't make me angry.
The problem is it's everything that is my favorite stuff. I mean, when I go to Baskin Robbins, I will get chocolate peanut butter ice cream most of the time, because they don't have my favorite ice cream but a couple months out of the year, which is chocolate mousse royale. But a couple months a year they have chocolate mousse royale, and I literally, as soon as I find out they have it, I start going there every couple of days. I even buy gallon tubs of it and keep it in my freezer and all this other stuff. It would be like one year they go, hey Drake, we just want to let you know we've got chocolate mousse royale ice cream, you know, whenever you want it. And then I go there, and instead of little bits of chocolate in it, it's actually cat poop. And it's like, wait, this isn't chocolate mousse. Yes, it is. It's exactly the same. Like, no, it's cat poop in chocolate ice cream. That's not what I want. I don't want to eat chocolate cat poop. So you're right. I do wallow in it, but it's because it's my favorite everything. They have ruined my life, like the things that I grew up with. It's
No, they
hard for
haven't.
me to forgive them.
See, that's the thing. Like, and this is, I guess, this is the difference. The prequels of Star Wars annoyed me. The sequels of Star Wars annoyed me. But I still enjoy watching episode 4, 5, and 6. Nothing
Five more than any of them, but yes.
Yeah, five is the best. No argument. But
yeah, no one argues about
nothing, nothing that they've brought out since can lessen my enjoyment of what I enjoy. Because I control how I feel about stuff.
True. I get it.
So all of this nonsense that, that they bring out now that potentially could, like, it's like book adaptations. I do not like season 8 of Game of Thrones. But that doesn't change the fact that I enjoy A Song of Ice and Fire.
Right. No, 100%. It's my religion, and they're stepping on my religion, and it hurts.
Well, I don't have one of those, so.
Right. Although I'm trying to convert you. You're getting there to the religion of stories. But yeah, no, I get it. Yeah. And I know it's just, you know the really thing is, and I shouldn't admit this publicly, but the really thing is that kills me. If you would give me that money, I would create you something that everyone would freaking love. Like, that's the thing. It's just petty jealousy. It's like, give me $250 million budget. Let me have that. So.
Yeah. I watched a very interesting, and this is a complete rabbit hole, but I watched a very interesting YouTube video where the dude was like, the problem with a lot of TV series and a lot of movies today is that they are being made for the money, not because somebody has passion. If you think of the difference, say, between, let's say, the Hobbit movies and the Lord of the Rings movies, Peter Jackson wanted to make Lord of the Rings. He fought tooth and nail for it, right? He made The Hobbit for money. And the difference between the two is vast, all right? Now, Blueeyed Samurai, whose like praises I've just sung, was the result of a movie maker in Canada pitching that thing for 20 years until Netflix picked it up. And the passion shows.
Yeah, 100%.
And
so I will agree with that 100%, but with a caveat. Because that's really what kind of the downfall of the movies. Well, like if you go back to the 70s and 80s and look at especially fantasy, they were obviously a rich kid who ended up having an inheritance of a couple $1 million they could just do whatever they want with, and they just wanted to have sex. And so they produced a movie and then had sex with all the actresses. Like, you can tell. And the movies, like, you get to Call the Conqueror, or I mean, Legend wasn't this way, but I just rewatched Legend, and oh my God, what a terrible movie. But like Zardoz, like the guy who paid for Zardoz, and it was only like a $500,000 budget. He literally said, "I'm doing this for naked women. That's all I'm doing this for." And I can't even believe they got Sean Connery to star in that, because it is so horrible. Although it did give us Sean Connery in that S&M outfit. Like, if you don't know what I'm talking about, just trust me. You'll thank me. Google Sean Connery Zardoz costume. You will thank me. There's something amazing about seeing Sean Connery in a Speedo, a leather Speedo, with basically nipple clamps. It's like, it's awesome. You'll never forget seeing it. So like that was that agenda. And then in the 90s, when the remakes started happening, and early 2000s, absolutely for money. Like, obviously Total Recall was successful, made us a lot of money, so let's just reshoot it. And then, unfortunately, the people that got to do it were like, well, I can't use anything that made the movie successful. So everything that made the movie successful is do the opposite of that. Well, if you do the opposite of that, then more than likely you're not going to be successful. It's kind of like that's dumb. But anyway, so that was for money. That was definitely Hollywood going, movies now cost more than they ever have. And so now they have so much more risk than they ever had. We need to hedge our bets. And since movie X was, massively successful in the 80s, let's reshoot it in the early 2000s. And obviously we're going to make money. The problem is today, and again, this is just me on my soapbox, they're not doing it for money. They know they're going to lose money. It's been proven to them they're going to lose money. So much so that, like, here's the interesting thing about Disney. Disney's having a hostile takeover internally right now. Internally, some of the big shareholders have gotten together and are trying to internally do a hostile takeover and fire every single person at Disney who's in charge. I don't know if they're going to succeed, but Apple's involved because Apple is one of the big shareholders along with these other billionaires who are part of this. And so if that works, there's going to be a massive shakeup at Disney.
So here's the thing, right? Like I said I think it was the last, like I said earlier, never ascribe to malice what you can ascribe, what is simple incompetence.
Could be.
And like, I don't actually think that these people are trying to get it so badly wrong. I think that they're just not competent to do what they want to do. And it is terribly easy to produce crap movies.
So, and I'm going to push back on that. I agree with that because I'm the one who was on that side of the argument earlier. I was the one going, well, I mean, incompetence. But here's the thing. So you are incompetent. You make a movie that loses money. Great. But then you make another movie and you do the exact same mistakes and you lose money again. Okay, maybe incompetence. But then you do it a fourth time and an eighth time and a 12th time. And every time you're doing the exact same thing. And every time you're losing money.
So bear in mind, bear in mind, right? Some of the things that you do, like, okay, so let's take an example. Captain Marvel did not lose money. It made $1 billion. Right. Now,
accidentally.
It doesn't matter. The thing is, the problem 100%. Is the message people. Barbie, made $1 billion.
100%.
Okay. And the reason why Barbie made $1 billion, in my opinion, is because it was fresh. Okay. Now, you might not agree with what Barbie said.
It also should have been a success because it was exactly what the target market wants. Twilight, horribly written, should absolutely be a success because it wasn't written for me.
Yeah.
It wasn't written for you.
Yeah.
It was written for a demographic that paid them lots of money.
So the thing is, right, the problem is that the message that movie studios have taken from Barbie is not give the target audience what they want. It's we should make more toy movies. We're now going to start a whole Mattel universe. I'm like, not the point.
So for those listening, if you think Maria's wrong, if you think she's like, oh no, it can't be that, you have no idea how stupid the people that run these industries are. So the industry, as soon as Hunger Games was a success, instantly started buying any first-person book that was written in present tense because they said, oh, Hunger Games was written in first-person present tense. Obviously, that's why it was successful. Not that it was well-written, not that it had dynamic characters, not that it actually had an engaging story. No. None of that. None of that matters. The only thing that matters is it was written in first-person present tense.
Yep.
And so the rash of first-person present tense exploded after that. That is literally how dumb the people are that run these industries.
And
yes, I know I'm saying this publicly and probably getting myself blacklisted on some things, but
that is the exact problem with a lot of what happens is there's a movie that's a breakout success, okay, that makes over $1 billion. And then they take completely the wrong message from it. It's like, seriously, I'm not kidding you.
Yeah.
They are planning a whole series of Mattel toy movies, planning a Mattel universe. It's like, you guys understand that that's not the point. That's not why we liked Barbie. Like,
right. Yeah. No. So I just want everyone to understand, like, you're not even remotely in the wrong camp here. Actually, there's one story. It's a little off the beaten path, but it does show the stupidity. I won't use any names, but one of my really good friends is one of probably the biggest name fantasy illustrators in the world, like the top of the top of the top. And he wrote a fantasy book, and he sold it to a big publisher. And after everything went through and edited and all that, he drew a cover. Now, he works for this publisher as an illustrator. They pay him $5,000 a cover. He does dozens of covers for them every year. Like, he is, again, one of the top. So he made a cover for his book that he wrote. And he was like, here, you can have this free because it's going on my book. And they went, oh yeah, no. You can't do the cover art for this book. You're the writer. And he was like, what? And they're like, yeah. Writers don't get to do the covers of their book. And he's like, you pay me like $50,000 a year to do covers for you. I'm giving you this free because it's the perfect cover for my book. And I am who I am. I'm not a writer. Like, I've never been a writer. This is me on the side doing this writing thing. I am an illustrator. For 3 years, they didn't publish that book because of this argument. For 3 years. Now, this guy's massively famous, so you know he's going to sell copies, whether the book is good or not. Doesn't matter. People are going to buy this book because of who wrote it, not because of what's written.
Yep.
3 years, they didn't publish this book. Until finally, one of the other big publishers said, hey, look, we'll publish that book and we'll put your cover that you're going to give us for free on. We're fine with that. That's when the first publisher finally went, okay, fine, we'll publish it with your cover. That's how stupid these industry people are. Like, you can't fathom the depth of the stupidity that goes on behind the scenes.
See, I can, because I've worked in corporate. Yeah, I've been part of big corporates. And let me tell you something about big corporates. And I promise you, it is the same in the entertainment industry. You think it's not, it's the same. Corporates are not run by competence. Okay. Competent people very rarely become managers. Mostly, management is populated by people who know other people. And that is why they have management roles. They have, instead of building their competence, they have spent their time building their internal brand and selling themselves. And that is how they get to those heights.
That is accurate to some of them. But the Peter Principle, I find, also drastically impacts. So if you're not familiar with the Peter Principle, basically you're at level A and your boss is like, oh my God, you're amazing at level A. Like, you're the best level A person we've ever had. We're going to promote you to level B. And then you get to level B. And they're like, oh my God, you're really good at level B. Let's promote you to level C. And then they're like, oh, you're still really good at level C. Let's promote you to level D. And it's like, you know what? You're not the best, but you're okay at level D. So let's promote you to level E. And then it's like, oh, yeah, you can't do level E. You're not good enough. Well, we promoted you here, so you're there. And then they just leave you there. And so you get promoted until you get to the level that you're no longer competent at that level. So the Peter Principle, when I was in corporate, you're right, there are those suck-ups that you're like, how did you get promoted? You're not competent at anything. Like, how did you become the manager? 100%, there's those people all over the place. But the Peter Principle also happens.
No, absolutely. The Peter Principle does happen. But part of the problem is that you end up with a lot of accountants in managerial positions, in like C-suite positions, because they've built their internal brand and they know
Yep.
nothing about the actual business. Nothing. Anyway, we've gotten way, way, way off course. So I'm going to pull us back here and recenter us on allegory.
Allegory.
So we've spoken about using allegory in terms of how it's used with Narnia and with Animal Farm and so on. But there's another place where you use allegory. And do you want to talk about external stories and allegory?
Sure. So there's two types of stories. There's internal story arcs and there's external story arcs. And basically the gist of them is, in an internal story arc, the theme is running inside the character, and the character is the one that's going to make the decision on which side of the theme is correct. Most stories, 80% of all stories, are internal. Star Wars, Luke Skywalker at the end has to decide, do I use technology to blow up the Death Star, or do I use faith to blow up the Death Star? It's in him. In Finding Nemo, Marlin has to look inside himself and go, do I remain an overprotective parent and let Dory die but protect my child, or do I trust that my child actually has grown and let him, go believe that he can save Dory, even though it puts him in a little bit of danger? So internal story arcs are always that way. When you go external, when you have an external story arc, it's no longer the characters deciding thing. It's the world that decides the climax at the end. And when you do that, the characters no longer can be characters. That's why external stories are never as successful as internal, because the mass market doesn't relate to an allegory character at the level that they relate to a character who's struggling with a decision internally. So when we look at like Lord of the Flies, we have Jack and Ralph, and Jack is, with the boys and the bad, they want to just live chaos and all that. And then you have Ralph that's like, no, we should probably try to get along, right? They're not actual characters. The thematic element that we're doing is, are all humans born evil? That's the question that Lord of the Flies asks. Are we born evil, or are we born good? And then just society makes us evil, whatever. So Jack is not a little, jerk-faced boy. He is an allegory for people who are born evil. That's what he is. So he can never grow. He can never change. He can never adjust. He has to be this from start to finish, or the allegory is broken. That's why it goes back when I say that the Force becomes really dumb afterwards, because they broke their allegory. And Ralph is not a good little boy who minds his manners. He's an allegory for all humans are born good, which means he can't grow, he can't change, he can't do anything. And at the end, when Piggy dies, I mean, it's a 30, 40-year-old book. If you haven't read it by now, spoiler alert, but whatever. When Piggy dies and everybody freezes, the world freezes, and they're like, oh, crap, we just killed a kid. Like, maybe we should think about this whole running amok and wild versus trying to build a civilization. Now it's the rest of the children, the world, who has to decide, are people born evil or are people born good? If the children had gone, okay, Ralph, we followed you, but we just killed a kid, that is bad. We're not doing this anymore. We're going to settle down. We're going to treat each other nice. We're going to build. That would be proving that all humans are born good. However, they didn't do that. They went, oh, let's kill Ralph now. Yay. So that proved that all humans are born evil. Same thing with V for Vendetta. V for Vendetta, the reason why it's not, even though it's a million times better written than Star Wars, and I'm talking about A New Hope, just looking at those two movies, because you have an internal story arc with Star Wars A New Hope and external with V for Vendetta. V for Vendetta is so much better written. It will never be as successful because it's an external story arc. So V is not a vigilante who's out there trying to overthrow the government and protect the little guy like a Batman. He's an allegory for, you cannot give up freedom for safety. And the government is not this evil, oppressive, whatever. It's an allegory for, you cannot give up safety for freedom. Like, safety is everything. And so neither of them can change, neither of them grow. And that's why we have a peripheral narrator in V for Vendetta, in Vi, or whatever her name is, the Natalie Portman character, because we can't grow as an audience. We can't grow with either of these two other characters because they don't have story arcs. And so they become allegories. And so anytime you're doing an esoteric story and then just to finish that up, at the end, when V blows up the government and there's that moment where the townfolk march on the government and the army is there, the world has to decide. If the army kills the protesters, then the reality is that you really need to have safety and not freedom, because if you're just taking the safety, you'd be alive. But they didn't do that. The army just stood there and the people walked past them and looted the government or tore it down or whatever. We don't know because it's after the movie. But the world decided, no. Safety is not the most important thing. Freedom is the most important thing. And so that's where you get an allegory as a character. But that's why you're never, if you go back to the last podcast that we just did, which was all about multiple POV characters, we talked a lot about you have to connect the reader to the character. The reader has to care about the character. In an external story arc, very difficult to do that. And so therefore, it's never going to be as successful because you're never going to connect the average person to those characters at a deep level.
Yeah. I mean, I read Lord of the Flies because it was prescribed. It's just an English work you have to read at school.
Right.
And it is an interesting read, but it is, it's a different thing. And I think one of the things that one needs to be aware of in fantasy is how easy it is to move into allegory. Yeah. Because if you think about just the things we've discussed so far, sorry, my cat. So if you think about the things we've discussed so far, droids become an allegory for slavery, right? And that's very common. It's very common to see it. And magic, right, can be an allegory for your internal power. Can become an allegory, and often is an allegory for a person's internal power. Often that's why, like, especially in stores, in my cat, especially in stories where, it's the nerdy character who gets magic. Magic represents them overcoming this nerdiness and, they're gaining power. And the problem is that you can end up in a situation where you create this allegory without entirely intending to, then you don't sit on the pot and you never actually deal with the allegory. And I was thinking about it, especially because I build worlds randomly because I get random ideas and stuff like that. And so I was thinking about a world where you've got a magic system that's based on, family bonds, and the closer knit the family is, the more power they generate, and it goes into their hearthstone. And it's like it becomes a thing that they use in their home, right? And then I started out with it as kind of a cozy fantasy idea, and then because apparently I can't do cozy fantasy, it ended up, I ended up with it being like a plot line of, but what if family bonds start being broken because of industrialization, and we have, like, the character's tossed out of her home, and so she's got to, like, figure out a new way of doing magic and so on. And I was sitting there staring at this. I'm going like, okay, I've just built an allegory for the power of trade unions. And is that...
So just to break in, she's trying to tell you need to put on your thinking cat.
Yeah. My cat is standing on my shoulders.
Licking her head.
So the thing is, and I might write that story because I think that there is value to discussing, like, the power of the worker versus the power of the industrialist. I think that there's interesting stories to explore that. But it needs to be a conscious decision that this is then an allegory that I'm actively playing with, and I'm going to use magic as a allegory for the power of bonds people can form, and the bond of the family versus the bond of the workplace. and the control that, people try and exercise over those bonds, and the power that those bonds gives. So yeah, don't let your allegories, much like your themes, don't introduce allegories and then leave them open. Like,
so that's two things I actually want to talk about before we finish up, which is some things that I've noticed that people confuse as allegories. And you just touched on one of them. Your theme is not an allegory. So, when Marlon is struggling to decide to be an overprotective parent or a parent that protects his child but lets them also make their own decisions and grow, that's not an allegory. That's a thematic element. It's a human thing that we all struggle with. Same thing with the Lord of the Flies. Whether all humans are born evil or all humans are born good is not an allegory. That's the theme we're playing with. Jack is an allegory for all humans are born evil, and Ralph is an allegory for all humans are born good. But the theme that we're trying to prove or disprove is the theme. It's not an allegory. That's right out in the open. That's what we're doing. I mean, it's not in your face.
Yeah. But
another thing that I think a lot of people mess up is, and this reminded me that when you talked about going to fantasy and how easy it is. So like the lion dude in Genesis of Oblivion, he is a slave. He's not an allegory for slave. He is a slave. And so he's going through the things of that. What he is he is a way to decouple the story from reality. So I can tell a story about slavery with this fictitious lion dude in a fictitious fantasy world and impact readers in a way that I want to impact them, as if I had written the exact same story with the exact same dialogue, but had it be, let's say, a black man in the 1700s in America. Everything could be identical, everything. And yet it's going to impact people differently, and they're going to relate to it differently because of it's so shackled to reality. And so that's not an allegory. The lion dude, it just, fantasy allows me to deal with hardcore topics that, are not as comfortable to deal with, but in a way that it's a lion dude. It's not
the
I'm
lion
not talking about
dude,
reality here.
The lion dude is a slave. Droids are an allegory.
Right. An allegory.
For slavery. Because they are not human. They're not, they're not sentient. There's that doubt. There's all of that. Yeah.
Right. So just understand that those are the two things that I think a lot of people confuse, is themes and then just decoupling yourself from reality in a sci-fi or a fantasy kind of mode. Because those aren't what we would classify as allegories.
Yep. An allegory is this thing represents this thing, but it's decoupled from its baggage.
Yeah. We're going to show you this thing, but we mean this other thing.
Yeah, exactly. With a lion dude, you pretty much, you mean like he is.
Yeah, no. He's a lion dude. In this world, lion dudes are slaves.
Yeah.
Like, that's it. That's all it is. I'm not representing him as,
anything else.
the ills of capitalism.
Yeah.
Like, he's just a lion dude, and he's a slave.
Exactly.
So just be aware of that.
Yeah. So I think that in terms of using allegory, like Tolkien famously hated allegory, but I don't agree with him on this. I think that allegory definitely has its place. So I enjoyed and still do enjoy Animal Farm despite its 1930s style. I am less fond of Lord of the Flies, but there's a lot of allegory that is done right and is done well. However, much like with themes, choose them. Don't let them choose you.
Yeah.
It's like kind of cool.
And that's what I think we're both in agreement on, whether my thinking on what they did with the droids in Star Wars versus what you think. It doesn't matter which one was correct. We both are like, either way, they didn't capitalize on it.
Yeah. They didn't sit on the pot.
Right. So you've been saying that. Is that like a finished? So in America, it's not sit on a pot. it's poop or get off the pot. Don't sit on the pot. So it's
so it's the
do
way the
your
language
business.
works. It's the same.
Yes. So I don't know if that was a Finnish thing or whatever, but that was just you've used that, and this is not even the first time you've used that colloquialism. You've used it in other podcasts, and it's just, and I mean, everybody knows what you mean, so it's fine. But it's just interesting. I always love when we go down like, oh wow, we are from two different worlds, aren't we?
So the expression is either I hope YouTube doesn't dislike us for that, but either piss or get off the pot. Right?
That's why I said poop.
Yeah. That's the one it is in English. So the converse, the one that I'm familiar with is sit. Sit on the pot or get off the pot. So,
right. Yeah. So that's, like I said, everyone, no matter which society we're from, we're going to understand each other. But but yeah, you've used it several times in this podcast, and it was interesting, the differences there.
Yep.
And then, not that we're going to go into it here, but that's also very different from subtext.
Yeah.
Because yes, subtext is saying something but meaning something else, but it's not in an allegory way where we're actually using an element in the world. I will say this, just to close my side of it, and if you have anything else to say, whatever. I don't use a lot of allegories either. Maybe I don't use any allegories. I've been racking my brains on. I use a lot of subtext. There's subtext in almost everything I write. I use a lot of decoupling. The reason why I love fantasy is because it decouples me from the social stigmas of whatever I want to play with, that are a human-based thing. But I don't want to deal with the baggage that comes with like writing a story set in 1700 America. I don't want to do that. I have no interest in that. But I do have an interest in the ills of slavery, slave mentality, getting over that. What does it mean to be free after that? How do you grow in? Like, those are all interest me, which is why I wrote the story with the lion dude. 100% what you said. Yes, use them on purpose and make sure you know what you're doing. But also, it's not that you have to use them. It's not something like, because maybe some academic will be like, oh, if you don't have an allegory in your story, you're not a real writer. I don't know if I've ever used an allegory. So just be aware of that.
So I do use allegory, but I think it's subtle. I don't know that anybody's ever going to really pick up on it. Maybe if I write the story with a magic hearthstone stuff, maybe then somebody will pick up on it. I do use some allegory, but I try and make it very subtle and very deep, because like Narnia, for example, is so in your face.
Right.
And that's one of the pitfalls, I think, with allegory is it can be very in your face.
So here's the thing with Narnia, though. It's actually not in your face. It's only in your face if you know Christianity. But if you're a child and you're just coming into it and you've never really, okay, maybe your parents go to church, whatever, but you're like 5, 6, 7, you don't really understand any of this stuff. It's just a fun adventure story. Like, you don't know that, Aslan is Jesus, and that, we're talking about revelations here and all of this. You don't. So there's a reason why Narnia was successful, because it was successful in both the secular world, because they don't even notice that it's an allegory for Christianity if they don't have that knowledge. And it's also successful in the Christian world because they're like, oh, look, a fantasy story set in the, this religion that I am. So yes, to you, because you grew up in a Christian world, and plus your feelings toward Christianity, it's going to be right in your face, and it's going to impact you in that way. But even though I was raised Christian, I think the first time I read it, I was 7. And I had no idea when I read that series that it was about Christianity. Like, none. Because my Christian family was those, like, we went to church on Easter because that's the day you're supposed to go. So it's not like we were like Bible thumping. Like, my wife's family is much more active in the church than I ever was, and my family ever was. So they still consider themselves Christians, but like at 7, I had been to church maybe 3 times. So like, it's not like We didn't read the Bible at night. We didn't, say grace before meals. We didn't do any of that stuff.
Yeah.
So like first time I read it, I had no idea. It was just a cool fantasy story to me. It wasn't until much later in my life that I was like, oh, I didn't even realize that that was an allegory for Christianity. So yes, it's in your face if you know it. But if you don't, I mean, the reason why Narnia was so successful is it isn't in your face.
Sure. I mean, Orwell is also pretty in your face. Like Animal Farm is a very direct.
Yeah.
But again, you have to know the subject matter. Like if you don't know the Russian Revolution history, you're going to miss most of what.
And you may just think it's a really cool story about animals trying to, make a life for themselves and then everything going awry.
Yeah.
That is what a good allegory is. I mean, like most people, when I tell them that the Force in A New Hope was an allegory for faith and religion, that blows their mind.
Yeah.
They're like, I've watched that movie 300 times and I never even thought about that.
Yeah.
Once you see it, you can't unsee it. But, that's in my opinion, that is a good, what you were just saying about you try to make it subtle. I actually think that is the best allegory to deal with. And I think that's the reason why, if we just look at the two examples of the external stories that I used here, V for Vendetta versus Lord of the Flies, because Lord of the Flies is more in your face. Jack is an allegory for all people are born evil. He is evil. He runs his boys evil. Like it's very in your face what it is. And Jack is the same, just very naive and very friendly and very like, what are you doing? You got to stand up for yourself. You can't just be run, rush, shot, all this. Like it's so in your face that I actually think that it impacts the audience less than what V for Vendetta does, because even though you get it, it's not like a lot of people think. I've talked to people where they're like, oh, no, V has an arc. He grows. I'm like, really? How does he grow? And then they'll pull out stuff that Vi, I think that's her name, the Vi character did. It's like, yeah, no, that was the Vi character. That because she's the window that the audience is looking through.
Yeah.
And so they're like, oh wow. Yeah, I didn't even realize he's just a cool character. He's a really cool character.
Yeah.
He's up talking to statues and telling them how much he loved them, but they betrayed him. And like, it's a statue, dude. You're talking to a statue. So like, he's a cool character. He's a really well done character.
He is a well done character, but I think also, honestly, like the message of V resonates more with people than the message of Lord of the Flies. Lord of the Flies is a dark message. Well,
also, it's not the message that most people agree with.
Yeah.
So you are right with that.
Golding, I think you'll find many more people who are on the freedom is more important than safety.
Yeah. Well,
not every that is not a universal message, but I think it's a more resonant message.
Yeah. Like I said, you definitely could find more people 5 years ago that felt that. Now, I don't know. It feels like a lot of people are going for safety over freedom here, at least here in America, but neither here nor there. But you are right. That is something, but it's also what I was saying was Golding hated humanity. He made it very, very clear that he thought the worst of us. He thought we were, but he grew up in World War I and all the stuff that he went through. And like, he really did hate humanity. Yeah. And so when he wrote his book, he's going to prove his opinions, which is humanity is pieces of garbage. And so most people who read Lord of the Flies don't feel that way. I feel like if you're in a foreign land and you don't even speak the language and you break your leg, someone's probably going to help you. Like, there's just good people in the world. And so, but not to Golding. To Golding,
Golding hated people. Like,
right.
Absolutely. he came out of the war and he
saw the worst.
Yeah.
He saw the worst of humanity.
Yeah.
And he lived it, for years. And so I don't fault him for having that view of humanity. Like, I don't know if I would feel different if I had to live through the trench wars of, the teens in World War I. That's just some horrid situations.
It's like, I understand why, but it is written from that perspective. But yeah,
right.
So I think
that's the reason why it also doesn't resonate with people, because it's a message that most people don't agree with. But when you prove something in your book, when you prove a thematic element in your book, it doesn't matter if the audience agrees with it or not, to make it successful. Lord of the Flies has stuck around for all these years because it still impacts us. It still makes us think. It still makes us go, I don't agree with that, but okay, that was interesting. It made me think about something that I wouldn't have thought about had I not read this.
See, I think another message from Lord of the Flies, just to sidetrack, something that always struck me when I read it, is it's also a nature versus nurture argument. And it's how deep does civilization go? So he's basically saying people are born like Jack. Civilization makes them like Rolf. But if you give them the opportunity, they will revert to Jack.
They'll go right back to Jack.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that is like, this is a struggle that we have had. I mean, you brought up, which was amazing because most people don't go there. You brought up both Frankenstein's monster and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Like, you're 100% on point with those. Those are, we as a species. I mean, stories are about delving into things that we as a species struggle with. That's why this new way of writing where you don't challenge anybody, I don't agree with. Stories need to challenge people. They need to make people uncomfortable. They need to make you think about stuff that you don't want to think about, because that's how we grow as individuals. And so you're right. Like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, why was it so popular? Frankenstein, why was it so popular? Because we struggle. We don't know. Like we are always like, could I be that evil? Could I, if I was put in, a specific situation, could I turn into a monster?
And just to be clear, Frankenstein isn't the monster. Like,
right.
Yes, he looks like it, but Frankenstein isn't the monster. The monster isn't the monster. It's
right.
Yeah.
It's society.
Yeah. It's Dr. Frankenstein. Like, it's that whole like perspective of
right.
And that's the thing, is like, allegories have been used and used well, and you absolutely, if you feel you have a story to tell where an allegory would serve you well, use it. But maybe read books like Frankenstein, like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, like Animal Farm, like Narnia, and see how they did allegory.
There's one thing that you said that makes me want to bring up a point of, there are Frankenstein versions, modern takes of Frankenstein, that don't work as well, that aren't as popular. And it's because they actually gave Frankenstein's monster a character arc. They allowed that character to grow, so therefore he was no longer an allegory. So therefore the building blocks of the story of what made it resonate with people is no longer there. And I think that's one of the reasons why, when you look at some of these other adaptations of Frankenstein's monster, where they humanize the monster, they really give him a character arc. You have to humanize him some, and she did, with the whole going after the girl and all that, trying to, obviously brain dead, but still trying to capture some of that humanity that he had when he was alive. But when they really delve into it and really make it a character, you never hear about these after they're the movie comes out or the TV show comes out, and like no one ever talks about it again. Why? Because it didn't impact us at the level that the story that the 16-year-old girl wrote, like, or 17, I think she was 17 when she wrote Frankenstein's monster. That's still one of the most amazing things to me, that, it was at a time that was very different than the world we live in, and at an age where you just don't expect somebody to be that deep and thoughtful. So like, that's the thing that always boggles my mind when Frankenstein's monster comes up. But
the very first science fiction book ever written was written in the 2nd century AD, I think it was 2nd century AD, in Greek. Might have been 2 centuries before Christ. Actually, it was around there. It was a very long time ago. And it was written to basically satirize all of the mythology, right? So the dude was like, I'm telling you this story and it's true. And then he proceeds to tell how the ship takes off from the ocean and travels to other planets. So science fiction and fantasy have been used to do that kind of thing since the first time we did it, which was probably this Greek dude with his ships.
I mean, we don't know for a fact, but Beowulf was probably written around 700 AD.
Yeah. Yeah. So it is worth thinking about whether you want to use allegories and if they matter to you. But do delve into books that have used allegories and make sure that your allegory is both on point and is being used as an allegory and not just accidentally mirroring something in the real world without actually ever being important.
Yep.
And I think that's a great place to end this episode.
I agree.
We will see you soon for another one.